Hi, this is a really quick tutorial on how to install OneUptime with Kubernetes. We recommend Kubernetes for production installs. If you're doing hobby install or if you are doing a home lab thing, feel free to go ahead with Docker Compose. In terms of Kubernetes install, we have published a Helm chart to Artifact Hub. So if you go to Artifact Hub, search for OneUptime, you should see this page. Today I'll be doing a Kubernetes install on a micro K8s cluster on my machine. So I have a VM up and running. I've installed micro K8s on it, and I'll be doing a Kubernetes install on that particular VM. In production, please use a cloud provider. Please use Azure, AWS, GCP, or any other cloud provider of your choice, and do not do a micro K8s install uh, as well. If you are doing a micro K8s install in production, please make sure it's a multi-node install and not a single node install like I'm doing today. The steps I'm going to show you is basically the same for any cloud provider, including including a micro K8s cluster that I have. So that shouldn't really, like, the difference shouldn't really matter. All right, so if I go back to my artifact hub, I have a README of what I need to do before I before I install OneUptime. So the first thing I need to do is create values.yaml file and have these properties in those file. So if I go to my VM, I've already created a values.yaml file, and I can actually show you how that looks like. You have the host, like it's mentioned in the README. It's oneuptime.nawazthandala.com. This is the domain I'll be hosting OneUptime on. You can also point this to an IP address of a service endpoint or of an ingress endpoint in Kubernetes. That's also possible. I will set up an e-record to that particular IP with this particular domain, and this is why you have oneuptime.nawazthandala.com as host. The second thing I'll do is, since I'm hosting this particular domain on Cloudflare, I'll be using Cloudflare Universal SSL to provision a certificate for my cluster. And this is exactly why I have HTTP protocols set to HTTPS and not HTTP. Third is I will be enabling ingress on this cluster. So I could say OneUptime ingress enable true, and host should match the host value that you have earlier. It should be exactly the same. All right, so once we have this thing written, I will quit this file, and since I've installed Kubernetes, I can do kubectl get pods. I don't have any resources in default namespace, which is expected. It's a fresh new cluster. What I'll actually do next is I will go back to my artifact hub, and I'll follow what it asks me to do. So I'll make sure I have a storage class. So if I go to kubectl get storage class, I see there's a storage class by default. Please make sure your cluster has a storage class by default as well. Since I'm using a micro K8s host path, this is basically what I see, but it should be different for your cloud provider. If you're using Azure, it should be different. If you're using AWS, it should be really different as well. Once I have a storage class, and if it is set by default, I do not have to do this in values.yaml. If your storage class is not default, you will have to have this particular thing in values.yaml file as well. Okay. The next thing I'll do is I'll add the OneUptime Helm repo. It already exists because I've tested this on my cluster earlier. And I should be able to get started by running this particular command. So if I install OneUptime, it says OneUptime is installed, it is deployed, it's the first deploy. And if I do kubectl get pods, I should see container creating, which is expected. The other thing which I should also see is an ingress created. So if I do kubectl get ingress, I should see this ingress created for me. I'll actually wait for the I'll actually wait for the things to get started before I can show you how to. So if I go to kubectl get pods, these will restart until you have ClickHouse up and running, until you have Postgres up and running, until you have all of these services up and running as well. So they will actually restart for you. Okay, looks like everything is up and running. We just want to make sure, like, we check the logs of this just to make sure everything is good. All right, everything looks great. So we will check the services, and if services are all up and running, and we'll check the ingress. You will have the address assigned to the localhost IP if you're using microkits. But if you're using a cloud provider, you should see an IP address automatically assigned, a public IP address automatically assigned from a cloud provider. What we need is, in my case, I will use a public IP of this particular VM to set up a record on Cloudflare. In your case, if you're using a cloud provider, you should see an address, you should see an IP that is already assigned here, and you will use that IP to set up an record on your DNS server. Okay, so this is what you do. So you create a new subdomain, oneuptime.navasanzara.com, which was in the host file. Since I'm using Cloudflare, I will create an A record to the public IP of the server, since it's a microkits instance. If it's not a microkits instance, you need to use this IP instead to this particular subdomain. Right? Once I've done that, I should be able to access OneUptime. So once you have Kubernetes installed, and once you have OneUptime installed in your cluster, you should be able to go to your domain and you should be able to see the accounts page. First thing you need to do is register for a new account. I can say new user at example.com and sign in with the new user. You should also be able to create a project. So I could say new project and create a project as well. That's how you install OneUptime in your Kubernetes cluster. You also need to follow the production readiness checklist if you are installing OneUptime for production use cases. So we have a checklist listed in Artifact Hub as well. Please make sure you follow all of this checklist, and then make your installation production ready. Thank you so much for listening.